Hello, it's me again, Morgan Gerritsen, first year student at the University of Oregon Executive MBA program. Thanks for joining me. I'm documenting my journey through this program so that I can reinforce what I'm learning, have something documented to look back on later, which would be kind of fun for me and my family, and also hopefully help somebody else that's thinking about doing the program or just wants to help moving along through the program. So I'll get you guys going with me. Thanks for joining. We just wrapped up our very first full-length 6-week course, which was managerial economics, taught by Professor Glenn Waddell. He's a PhD, is in the economics department at the university. He's done a lot of stuff from Canada. He's mainly a labor economist, and he's from Canada, so he spells that with an O-U-R if he's in a really good mood or bad mood. I think he'll tell you a different story either time you talk to him. But a super great guy, lots of fun. We had a great time with this class. We mostly focused on the macro side, so not a ton of micro in this class. We did dabble in it. We kind of dabbled in whatever we could over the course of 6 weeks. It wouldn't be my series if I didn't start with something embarrassing, so you can see how tired I was after day one. This was exactly 6 weeks. I'm sorry, this was the night of 6 weeks ago, the night of my first video. So the first video I did in the morning before my first class, and this is the same day. You can kind of see how exhausted I was just after one day. So this is maybe 16, 18 hours later.
First day of school under my belt. The managerial economics course that I just started tonight. Wow, I'm really pumped about this class. I thought it was going to be hard. I don't think I'm going to be wrong about that. Just kind of gives you some guardrails and then sends you off on your own. And I actually think I'm going to love this style.
And I was right. I really love that style. I think that it was very discussion oriented. The questions or the concepts were led by questions rather than just textbook. Like there was zero textbook, which was really fun. It was a really fun way to learn. So let's dive in. Economics. I'm going to try to keep this under 20 minutes. We'll see what happens. It was a lot of content in 6 weeks. Scientific study of human behavior. So I'm kind of a behavioral economic nerd. I really love the book Nudge by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. I think there might be 10 editions of it at this point. So I've kind of known or been familiar with the methods of thinking, and that's, economics is more of like a method rather than like a doctrine. And the focus is on critical thinking skills, and then developing like really, and this is what Glenn leans into a lot, is healthy skepticism. So being really conscious of thinking about everything that's kind of happening around you, integrating data and theory, and sometimes letting history allow you to make some assumptions, but asking generally a lot of questions, and then navigating policy relevant questions, which for me is pretty important. I'm in the sustainability industry, as some maybe remember, and there was just a California bill, SB 253 was just passed. When I started this course, it was still on its way to the governor's desk. So a lot has happened in the last 6 weeks. In addition to that, there's a war started in Israel. There's been quite a lot has happened in the world since we started this class. So keeping in mind how quickly things change, policies change, free trade, everything's kind of always in flux. But again, here we are. So this class is more of an application of your thinking skills. So asking one question at a time. So for example, we're going to address the benefits or the outcomes of a ban on commercial fishing by asking, do you expect this ban to decrease the volume of fish harvested? And the answer is always, it depends. So for example, if you roll it out I'm going to roll it out on Wednesday, November 1st. That means everybody's going to fish their hearts out until then, deplete the resources in the ocean, and probably have a pretty detrimental effect on the fish supply. Otherwise, you could look at more of a ratcheted approach where you sort of have, a quantity maximum by this date, a quantity maximum at this date, and sort of ratchet it. So it sort of has stages of phases, some sort of integral limitations that can be applied and maybe have a better impact if the goal is to decrease volume rather than deplete the population. Similar question, should tuition be subsidized? It depends. We say it depends, probably the answer of everything. So thinking about tuition would, of course, I'm a student, I would love for it to be subsidized. But at what cost? So who, how is it being subsidized? Is the government taking funds from another program to subsidize education and higher education for somebody like myself? So there's quite a lot to ask. Most of the questions are not straight black and white questions. Trade-offs is definitely a topic we talk about in econ. So for example, who benefits from raising the minimum wage and who loses? One of the questions we talked about was, in the case of, for example, Seattle passing the minimum wage, the $15 minimum wage, what does that mean? Where's that going to come from, and who's going to kind of pay for it, right? Not just taxes, but how is it going to impact low income earners? Are they actually going to be better off? First order problem would be, do I have a job tomorrow? So sort of taking a lot more into account when we're going and asking these questions. So who's benefiting from this? Certainly the people that are getting a higher wage, but are they generally, as an entire group, are there people in that group that are not benefiting from it? In fact, if there's no jobs, or if there's a depletion in jobs, reduction in jobs, are they in fact benefiting? So quick sidebar, this all brought me back to labor economics that I studied a few years back. I did a data science class online at Cal with these two amazing professors. Steve Tadelis, still in touch. He is a Berkeley professor for many, many years, but he's worked also, I think, at Stanford. He did a long stint with eBay. He's been with Amazon during a lot of their comeuppances and had quite a long and interesting career. Also, Shakar Karif was the chair of the department there, and done a lot of work and models around political economics. But one morning during class, we had he showed up to lecture a little disheveled one morning, and we found out that somebody on one of his colleagues in his department had actually won the Nobel Prize that night before. So I've talked to Glenn about this. He's probably knows some people that haven't, and the experience around it is pretty busy. So David Card, labor economist, also from Canada, who wrote that raising the minimum wage this is back in the 90s, did not actually result in jobs lost or have a negative impact on employment at all. So I only brought this up because it sort of does a fun little tie back to Glenn, the other Canadian labor economist. Any case, all right, back to econ. Who benefits from making insurers pay for a second night in the hospital for women after childbirth? Again, being a mom, I benefited from a second night in the hospital, but does that mean everybody does? Certainly the baby, right? Like the father and the mother, of course. But does everybody? I mean, what impact does it have on insurance premiums? And does insurance suddenly become out of the realm of potential affordability for some people? So is this policy actually pushing people that are on the margin of being able to afford insurance out? So is it leaving them behind? So thinking about that when we're thinking about trade-offs. A future question I'll be asking probably in a couple of years. So this bill won't be applicable, or I should say the regulation that it's putting in place won't be required for a couple of years. But 253 is going to require businesses in California that do over $1 billion in California, no matter where they're based, to report their scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 carbon emissions. So that is quite a big responsibility. There's quite a transition involved. If we're going to ask ourselves, in a couple of years, we will return to this question, did this bill decrease carbon emissions? And what were the trade-offs? And of course there will be, and we'll have a long and chewy conversation about that when it comes. For what it's worth, I'm completely in favor of this bill, but that is neither here nor there when we're asking this question when it comes time. And Gavin Newsom is the governor of California, and actually I think right now in China, trying to kind of spread this gospel of doing a better job at measuring emissions and trying to use this as a model that they can go and plug into other countries and other economies worldwide. So there's potential for this to take off pretty quickly here. And another sidebar very quickly, I did a panel actually on this exact topic. The 3 days after Gavin Newsom had said he would sign it, he had not yet signed it. We hosted a LinkedIn networking group that I help run called Impact PDX for sustainability professionals here in Portland. Hosted this panel on climate policy and featured a handful of folks from a company called Ceres. I think my camera might be blocking some of them. Sarah Sachs was very, very active from the Research Foundation series in getting that passed. She spent a lot of time in Sacramento. I, working at Persephone, have a pretty close relationship with Ceres, and I know Sarah pretty well. So she was willing to come on and speak as a panel, as well as our Tobias Reed, who's our Oregon State Treasurer, to kind of talk about what the future of ESG investment and all of that looks like. So for me, super interesting, and it tied back really well to this program and the topics that we had sort of in play at the time. And also wanted to show that a few members of my cohort, class 39, came and joined up and showed support and met some new people, and it was a great experience. Thanks, guys. All right, this one was really fun. When I came home from my first night of school, my husband said, "What did you learn?" And I said, "We talked about legalizing meth." And he goes, "What?" And I just thought, yeah, that's all we really covered. I mean, that's all that's really important right now, right? I just had a really good time joking with him on that. But basically, we talked about trade-offs in the context of, for example, legalizing cannabis. So if you call cannabis and beer, for example, substitutes, then if you replace beer with cannabis, are you then going to perhaps see fewer drunk driving incidences on the road? Are you going to see fewer crimes? You think about the effects, I mean, medically, scientifically, of cannabis versus beer or alcohol. You're probably going to have, you can kind of imagine somebody that's probably a little calmer, probably not feeling like the first thing I want to do is jump in a car. So we talked about the trade-offs and benefits of that versus the trade-off if we were to legalize meth. And I think we can all agree that legalizing meth would have the relevant trade-offs do not equate at all. This is us just talking. Absolutely love this cohort. There's 50 fantastic brains in here. I'm having the best time working and talking and getting to know them all. This is Glenn doing his magic. All right, so looking at the economic problem, which is going to describe scarcity, basically. So how do we solve for scarcity? It depends on, scarcity is when you don't have enough of the things that you find desirable, and that we're not having enough of the things that we find desirable to satisfy our unlimited desires. So basically, you just always want more. And then, trying to solve for that, that sort of is the economic problem. But in general, kind of taking into account theory where we can't derive data, sometimes we have to lean on theory and some assumptions sometimes. We talked a little bit about unintended consequences, implementing a rule to reduce the number of drunk drivers on the road may increase, for example, the number of bribes to police or the number of hit and runs that are related to alcohol or something like that. So just, again, thinking about unintended consequences of a certain policy. Something we talked a lot about was price and prices in general. So price not being a dollar amount, but more of a ratio. So the ratio at which any goods are exchanged. So if I have 2 bushels of wheat, I'll give you 3 pairs of shoes. So the price would be the 3 pairs of shoes. In that case, my price or their price. So one thing to keep in mind, it's impossible to change just one price. If you move the needle on one thing, the needle's moving somewhere else. So the relative price, if you change one, the relative price of another item, another good is going to change also. So one example, another one was taking a small coffee, like a 8-ounce coffee and a 12-ounce coffee, and they're $3 and $4. But if you raise the price of the small coffee, you can see the relative price actually changed for the larger coffee, and it's actually a little cheaper relatively to buy the larger coffee now. So you might have people going for the larger coffee by changing the price of the smaller coffee. It's a little weird to wrap your head around, but you can kind of see now that the price is really everywhere you look, and everything you do and every price you change has an effect down the road. So again, scarcity kind of leads to competition, and there's the consumer theory. So the theory characterizes consumer choices in a systematic way. We've talked, like I said, mostly about demand. We talked a lot about supply and demand, but we've really honed in on demand, so that, or this way, I guess, on the mirror, so that we could understand just the concepts of economics and apply them in demand, and then later on, sort of rush through them in the supply side as well. I'm going to show you my very quick rookie demo number 1. All right, I'm going to show you the shortest demo of a supply and demand curve you've ever seen. So this is what the supply curve is going up and to the right. Demand curve always would be downward sloping, meaning that as the price comes down, the quantity demanded goes up. So if you can see, going from the left to the right on the bottom axis, the quantity goes from 0 and continues to move upward. On the left-hand axis, that's measuring the price. So not necessarily in dollars, but in this case, we can just say it is in dollars. So going up is higher in price. So if you look at this particular, this curve here, you see that in this market, at the price of $4 per unit, the quantity demanded is 5. And that, where these 2 points meet the supply and demand curve and they meet in the middle, that's called equilibrium. So this is where what they would say is the market has cleared. And this is sort of the most attractive part for the prices to go. So if we, for example, if I were to say we drop the price to $3 and we sort of go over to here and we've hit a point, we'll draw a whole line all the way across. So we're coming in a little bit below the equilibrium. Now we have this distance between these two right here, these two items, the supply and the demand. So it's about 3 to 6.5. So there's a shortage. You can indicate that by the amount that's below the point of equilibrium. The shortage is the distance between those 2 points. So it'd be between 3 and 6.5. So there's a shortage at $3 is a shortage of 3.5 quantity of that item. Do something similar, but in the opposite direction. So let's say we raise the price up to $6, and I draw it all the way across. Really nice even line there. And you can see where now the price has hit a different point on the supply and demand curve. And if I draw a line down, the demand for the unit, the demand for this good at $6 is 3. The supply amount, the quantity supplied at $6 is 8. So now we have what's called a surplus, where there's actually too much of this good available. And the surplus is measured by the distance again between these 2 points. So we have a surplus at $6 per unit. We have a surplus of 3 to 8 of 5 units. There you go. Very detailed, very extensive. And all right, I'm going to show you this, the jump down. All right. So some of the constraints taking into account when you're thinking about what influences demand, obviously wealth, income, separate things, but very much related. Time. So how much time do you have available? What's the actual price of the good? What's the legality around it? Is it available? How much availability is there? Another thing you can think of is like lifespan, your lifespan or the product's life cycle. So those are some of the things to kind of keep in mind. If we could measure those, could we also predict choices? It seems like we could, but really no, because we also need to be able to measure individual preferences. And We can't do that without making some assumptions. So how we do that, some of the assumptions we make, that people have preferences. They do. They prefer vanilla or chocolate. People prefer more to less. That's an assumption we make, but it's very common. People are willing to substitute, which means some things will get left behind, and that sometimes people will be willing to accept an alternative solution or an alternate product. And then lastly, we assume that marginal values are always decreasing. So as the price increases, every time for every unit, we will be willing to pay less for the unit, for the next unit. One more rookie demo. Let's hit it. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about marginal value. Marginal value is the amount that I am willing, as a consumer, that I'm willing and able to pay for one additional unit of a good. So I am willing to pay a certain amount for a good, and as the number and the quantity of the good goes up, the amount that I'm willing to pay for each additional good goes down. So this is it goes downward, similar to the demand curve. This basically is the demand curve. So with each additional unit, I'm willing to pay less. My marginal value is less. So let's say that a good is priced at $4. So that's kind of messy, but right up here. So I want to see, am I willing to pay the next dollar, for the next unit? So at one unit, I'm willing to pay, the marginal value is above the price. So at one unit, I'd be willing to pay $8. Yep, I'm going to buy that unit. At 2 units, the price is $7. Yep, I'm definitely willing to buy that one. At 3 units, the price is now $6. At 4 units, the price is $5. And at 5 units is right where I hit my marginal value. So when the marginal value equals the price, that's where I stop purchasing. And in this example, at my 5th unit, so my 4th unit, and then also I'd be willing to pay for the 5th unit because it still meets my marginal value. It's still equal to price, but anything beyond that, I would not purchase. So that would be the end. This is my optimal purchasing amount. And then one other cool thing here is this space that's up above the price and below the marginal value, or also known as below the demand curve. This is called the consumer surplus. So this is kind of like my profit as the consumer. This is where I make out, right? So I feel like I got a great deal, and this is the amount of money I'm coming out ahead. There's margin of value. This is just my team, my boring old team that has no idea how to have a good time. I can't get over how horribly paired we got with this team. I love these guys. I couldn't be more excited about our group. We just have such a good time. We meet twice a week. We have a bright group, also full of energy and lots of humor. I'll do really quick intros. Michael's a president of a distribution company in the automotive space, jack of absolutely all trades. Eric is a director of marketing for a outdoor brand company, outdoor gear. Clever, hilarious, natural skeptic. We really appreciate that. And he does love constructive feedback, and he's actually teaching us quite a lot in that area, in a very, very positive way. It's been really, really cool, and really willing to share his knowledge. I love that. David works for Clackamas County. He is an educator, and we can say one thing about David: he is a do-it-all guy. He loves to build stuff. He loves to put stuff together, create. You give him kind of like an instruction sheet, a bunch of materials and a bunch of tools. The guy can put anything together. And then Brenda, just boring old Brenda here. This is not her real hair. This is Brenda going to an 80s prom. These two, Brenda and Michael, are constantly on the move in their business. So we always play the game of what Marriott are they at today? But Brenda's she's a national sales director, I believe, for our sales manager for a credit union. So all different businesses. I'm in product management and IT at a software company. We do carbon accounting. So we're really spread out all over the place. All right, moving on. Diamond water paradox. This is something I think I'd heard of a zillion times and maybe didn't really have a good grasp of, but it's again talking about marginal values. So market prices are determined by marginal values, not necessarily total value. So if the marginal value of a diamond, so the value, what I'm willing to pay for one more diamond is higher than water, that's what gives us the diamond water paradox. So even though water is essential to life, we'd be willing to pay more for a diamond. You'd be paying one more diamond is much more expensive than one more glass of water. Opportunity costs. So this is the cost of a foregone something, whatever the next best alternative is, has a cost associated to it, and we're taking that into account. So like watching this video, is this the opportunity cost of this could be you watching a really great Netflix documentary right now about David Beckham, but no, you're here with me. So accounting profit would not take into account opportunity cost. It would just be what's on the ledger, what goes in the balance sheet, and so on. Whereas the economic profit would most certainly take into account the opportunity cost lost or gained. So those are some things I thought were pretty interesting to point out. Moving down, let's see here. So price elasticity of demand. This was actually quite interesting to learn about. That is, by definition, the measure of the responsiveness of the quantity demanded to a change in the price. So if the price changes a little, does the quantity demanded change a lot? If that is the case, then it's very elastic. That means that you can change the price of, for example, there's two machines of soda next to each other and they're $2 for a can of Coke, but you change the price to 99 cents on one, nobody's going to pay, or I'm sorry, 1.99 on one, nobody's going to keep paying $2. Everybody's going to go over here and pay the 1.99, even for 1 penny. They're all going to go over here. So same if you move it up a penny. If you were to make it $2.01, nobody's going to buy this Coke anymore. Everybody's going to buy from this machine. This product is very elastic. The price is very elastic. It depends. One small change in price has a huge change in quantity demanded. Something that's low in elasticity would be something like a life or death medication, something like insulin or something, where no matter if the price goes up or down, I still need the same amount of that. So the quantity demanded isn't going to change. There's very little elasticity there. We call that inelastic. Similar with cigarettes, crack, other stuff like that, but primarily it's easier to think about something like a pharmaceutical or something that you'd be dependent on. What's the effect of price increase on revenue? So this is actually pretty interesting. So as you move up and down the demand curve, right? Up towards the top are the things that are more elastic. So nobody's going to want to be a producer in the items that are down in the inelastic stuff. Nobody but the experts. There's not going to be a lot of competition in those areas. The competition is going to be up here. And the profit actually moves up as you move up closer up the price. However, quantity is also going to be coming down while you're going up with price. So what's interesting about that is the revenue, the ideal revenue spot's right in the middle of that line. So right in the middle of the demand curve. There's a little bit of room to wiggle. We call that unit elastic. So maybe within, you can fudge the price a few dollars and not have a huge impact on your profitability or on your revenue. But the further you go up towards profit, you're going to lose some of that revenue. So it's something that we really want to take into account when we're getting ready to go to market, for example, or modify prices on products. What influences an individual's choice? Again, those are going to be stuff that are, income, time, similar stuff that we talked about before, but also availability of close substitutes. So whether there's a substitute for something or not will influence my choice. How much of my income spent on that good, like how expensive it is, obviously the price is going to influence my choice. And if I have more time to think and more time to adjust to the cost, which I call the second law of demand, then that would also probably influence my choice. A couple of different types of goods. So normal is something that as increases rise, the quantity demanded for normal goods rise. So that might be something like organic food. It could be something like pretty much any kind of goods, like normal goods. It would go at anything that would be go up with the demand for would go increase with an income increase. Inferior goods are sort of the opposite. So something that you only buy when your income is lower, or when you have less disposable income. So something like top ramen, or which not everybody would agree that that's a bad thing, but something like that, like an inferior good that as prices or as incomes decrease, as incomes increase, the demand for those inferior goods is actually going to decrease. So people are going to start wanting those other normal goods again. And then we have substitutes and complements. So substitute is something where there might be, you're going to choose one or the other. So Lyft or Uber, traditional MBA versus an executive MBA, if you're going to choose one or the other. Generally, the demand, if the price for one increases, a lot of things happen, and the demand for the substitute actually increases as well. So they generally rise and fall together. Complements are the opposite. So let's use a coffee maker and coffee filters or something. So if you have, that's probably not a good one, peanut butter and jelly. People tend to use those two products together, but they have sort of a fixed amount of money to spend or so on. If the demand for peanut butter, if the price for peanut butter rises and its complement is jelly, then the demand for jelly is probably going to, the quantity demanded for jelly is probably going to decrease. So we talked also about like having Apple products, and then like a MacBook Pro and a MacBook Pro sleeve. Like if the one is a complement for the other, one is certainly not a substitute for the other. All right, shipping the good apples out. I love this theory. It explains so much of what happens in my house. So it's basically the idea that like what you normally would think, boy, that's really expensive. Why would I spend more on something? Because there's a lot of factors that go into play. And by the time it gets to you, or by the time you get to the point where you're making the purchasing decision, you've probably made a series of other decisions already that you're less sensitive to the cost of the good. So it ends up the difference between the two goods, an inferior good and a superior and a normal good, the difference between the two tends to converge a little bit. So an example, shipping the good apples out, if you add transportation costs, so if you add this value, T, so price of green apples obviously are more expensive, obviously by looking at this piece, almost twice as expensive if you're just selling them out of your backyard. But once you introduce transportation, say you're transporting them to Arizona or something like that, the value, or I should say the relative costs, starts to kind of come down actually for the price of the superior good or of the normal good. So for example, you get in, keep going up, T equals 2, T equals 3, T equals 4, T equals 5,000. You can see the ratio, the relative price between the two items is going to just converge and converge and converge and converge. So people are going to be willing to pay for the more expensive item because they've already invested, they've already absorbed the cost of the transportation. Other examples of this that I think are hilarious and fun. So when a couple, we're planning to go out to go see Les Miserables in a couple weeks. To me, if I was going by myself, I would have the ticket. I would probably pay for parking. That would be my expense. But if I'm going to bring my husband, now we've paid a babysitter. We've got 2 tickets. We're probably going to go to dinner. So why is a couple more likely to go out for like a nice dinner and go and spend more money when we have a babysitter at home? Because we've already invested in having the babysitter at home. So like it's a sunk cost. Let's go spend some money on a date. And it's amazing how quickly that adds up. So the added fixed cost of the babysitting actually lowers the price of the more expensive activities. There's this idea of this choice seat phenomenon. So I, for example, have traveled to go see college football games, went to Minnesota to see a Vikings game. I've been to Arizona to see a Vikings game, or even going down to see a Ducks game. By the time I drive down there and pay for a hotel, pay for gas, take the day off, do whatever it needs to happen to make it work, of course I'm going to splurge on the more expensive ticket. Because by the time you take into account dinner, hotel, all of that stuff, the relative price of those tickets has definitely come down. So I would be way more willing to spend $90 than, for example, somebody that's local to Eugene that would probably spend the $45 and get a different seat. Anyway, I thought that was really fun. I know this one's going to be applicable in everything that happens in my day-to-day life. Markets, I'll breeze through this. Markets are determined by changes in demand, changes which might be like tastes, demographics might or income might change demand, or other prices. The price inelasticity, the cross price elasticity of demand, so also known as own price elasticity. So that's taking into account the elasticity of two different goods and how they might play on one another and change the demand that way. I won't go into too much detail, no more demos. And then changes in supply also won't go into too much, but like I said before, the levers are sort of similar, just a little bit like over here instead of over here on a different curve. You can kind of imagine sort of how the different rules are applied, but on the producer side. So then market spillover, we talked a little bit. I thought it was super fun just to kind of, as an example, we said, okay, crude oil. There's a sanction on crude oil in Iraq. And I think there was in the 90s. So did that have an impact on the market for crude oil? Of course. So it did. Then did the change in supply have an impact on production of heating oil? Because crude oil supplies heating oil. So then the supply of heating oil is now decreased. So the equilibrium price of heating oil will rise as the quantity is falling. That's a supply demand that we talked about earlier. And then taking that another level, does the increase in the price of crude oil somehow affect the US market for gas, which we can all relate to? Crude oil is an input for gas. The supply of gas will decrease and the equilibrium prices for gas will rise as quantity falls. So those are some examples of it. I think you probably heard a lot about those. I just think you could go for days, just keep going down the chain. Like we change one thing and then all the things that change from it, I think is really fun to kind of think about. Market failures and externalities. So this I missed one. There we go, policy levers. So we talked not too extensively about this, but a little bit. So taxes, why do we have taxes? Well, we want to raise revenue for public goods. We want to discourage bad behaviors. There you go. The DUI charges is a very expensive one. We also want to redistribute some of the income. Subsidies. Why do we offer subsidies? We want to provide sometimes an economic stimulus. So thinking about during COVID, that was a huge time for subsidies. People made more money on those checks, some of them, than they'd ever made in their life. We want to encourage good behavior. So take that money and go spend it, put it in the economy. We want to redistribute income and wealth. So those are some reasons why we would give out taxes and subsidies, and which are basically just the opposite of one another. What are the different types? So there's a per unit, like on a pack of cigarettes or tobacco. Ad valorem, which is like a sales tax. So in Oregon, we don't have a sales tax, but maybe in Washington, 8% sales tax on something. And there's also a lump sum, which would be like a license fee or something like that. So there's different types of taxes and subsidies. Price controls, we talked a little bit about minimum wage, so that would be considered a price floor, and that would be betting the lowest that you would be able to assign, right? So you'd be able to go that low and no lower than that for a minimum wage. You can certainly pay higher, but not lower. Price ceilings, we'd consider maybe rent control. So that would be similar, but on the opposite side. So that might start creating a bit of something above the equilibrium. But rent control tends to it'll be like the highest that you can pay for something, and that can create another series of different kinds of problems. So there's also something in place to try to help the consumer, like anti-gouging laws. So in a time of sort of turmoil, for example, like during Katrina, during Hurricane Katrina, you're not allowed to raise the price of water, for example, or something like that. So we kind of went away from thinking like all prices, I didn't update this one, all prices are all taxes are bad. But in reality, there are actually a couple of things like externalities that can make taxes not be terrible. So I won't go into too many externalities, but they just basically to say they exist to the extent that the costs or benefits of some action are imposed on a third party. And then there's something called, I'm just going to point this quick one out, the Pigovian tax, which is a tax on the negative production externality. So it's like a tax on a tax, which kind of is the two wrongs make a right chain. And it sort of has the effect of correcting a different distortion. And the reason I thought this was so fun, because this came up completely after the test. Most of the class was gone. We just kept talking about this stuff, and not what's on the screen here, but just externalities. And one of our classmates was like, "Oh, there's good taxes, hallelujah!" That's really great. So part of this journey, right, is telling about my experience too, and documenting the experience. So I want to be able to capture some of that. Some of the takeaways, of course: practice healthy skepticism. Don't be the jerk that's constantly skeptic about everything, but practice healthy skepticism. Ask lots of questions. Don't take anything just for face value. Think about the way that people are wording or framing or leading you with the data. Raw data and inferences made from the data are different, right? So somebody could make whatever inference they want from a data, but look at it, ask questions about it, understand how they got to the conclusions that they got to, and there may be a simpler answer out there. Keeping in mind it's impossible to change just one price or just one behavior. This came up a lot, and I think it's fun to kind of apply that throughout the course of your day. If you tell your kid, we're going to do this instead of going to a movie today, where there's a price, we're going to have to clean our room, or you have to clean your room if you want to go to the movie. And if you clean your room, you get to go to the movie. So there's a influence there. There's everything you think about, you'll be thinking about it all the time now. So you choose to invest, prices are everywhere, similar to behaviors, right? So prices, everything has one. Everything exchanged has a price. It may not be in dollar amounts, but it may be like getting my kid to incentivize to read a chapter out of his book, or make his bed, or brush his teeth, or something like that. And then choosing where to invest, wherever you can truly make an influence on the outcome. So, being a little bit more conscientious about how you invest your time, what makes a good decision, what is a smart decision economically, and what factors to take into account. So unintended consequences, trade-offs, all of that. And then lastly, engage in the courses, at least. Get involved, participate, ask a lot of questions, talk to your teammates, talk to other teammates, talk to everybody, but don't over-engage, don't overthink. I think a lot of us found ourselves in the trap where we were overthinking sometimes, and it kind of came out and bit us when we were trying to get through our tests. So just highlighting our life of a student here. Halloween's around the corner. A couple of us showed up in costumes the other day. Masamba there in the middle. You met Michael already. Masamba's in the middle. He insists that Jurassic Park is the best movie of all time, so he came in proper attire. And then this is right after our last class, we all went and watched Oregon Ducks crush Washington State. So that was pretty fun. And then in the spirit of Halloween, I think I'll do a quick Glenn impression. And I would say like something like this. I see where you're going, and your intuition is right. Let's take it further. Okay? I hope he doesn't kill me for that. This is my crew. My year one crew, I hope for the next 50 years. All right, go Ducks!